This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Picture this. It's a sunny day in the Middle East. You wake up to the sounds of crashing waves outside your castle on the shores of the Arabian Gulf, just like usual. You've recently had an American man visit you, and all seems fine until you get the call. Your brothers, who live right next door, have also met the American man. From one day to the next, they're suddenly furious with you. So much so that they want to cut all family ties. You ask what you did to hurt them, and they come up with a list of things, except you didn't do those things. This sunny morning turns into a nightmare morning because your neighbors and former brothers are completely serious. Frustratingly, your house is surrounded by their houses, so if they cut you off, you'll also be cut off from the entire world. This is what happened to the state of Qatar on June 5th, 2017. Exactly 3.5 years later on the day, this nightmare is seemingly over. So what are the implications of the Qatar blockade ending on Qatar Airways and the entire aviation industry? This will be a two-part video, so you know where to click to stay notified. Now, let's go back in time. In the middle of the 2010s, Qatar Airways was growing at an unprecedented speed. They had ordered every imaginable widebody, including the Airbus A380. At this time, Emirates and Etihad were both industry-leading in terms of hard product, and they were gaining global notoriety for their lavish onboard experiences. It wasn't until 2014, with the opening of the brand new and world-leading Hamad International Airport, that Qatar Airways could truly start to outcompete the other two. The same year, Qatar Airways launched a low-key subsidiary in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The subsidiary was unambitious in typical Qatar Airways style, so naturally they decided to only lease up to 48 Airbus A320s, including taking delivery of 4 aircraft in one day, as one does. There was only one problem, and you may have seen this before in my analysis videos. The airline wasn't certified, so Qatar Airways ended up operating these aircraft instead. 2015 and 2016 came and went, still no certification, but at this point, they already had 10 Al-Maha aircraft in their fleet. In the meantime, Qatar Airways expanded their Saudi network to 9 destinations, which is a lot in a country of 34 million people. As a point of comparison, Pakistan, with a population 6.5 times bigger than Saudi Arabia at 220 million, only has 8 airports served by any foreign airline, 7 of which are served by Qatar. Perhaps even more impressive is the number of seats Qatar Airways offered to Saudi Arabia. They had 146 weekly flights to the country, or around 21 per day, with over 2 million seats per year, equivalent to about 5,540 seats per day. That's the capacity of 10 Airbus A380s. Imagine what a massive role the airline played in the Saudi aviation market, and not to mention the impact this had on demand for flights with their national airline, Saudia. All this completely pales in comparison to Qatar Airways' footprint in Bahrain, or frankly, their complete grip on the UAE. To the tiny single airport nation of Bahrain, with a population of 1.5 million and merely a short boat ride from Qatar, the airline offered 7 daily flights with a capacity of 2,200 seats. To Dubai, pay attention now because no, you're not dreaming, Qatar Airways offered 8,250 seats per day across 21 flights to a single city. They also offered up to 9 daily flights to other Emirati cities with 3,100 seats. David Casey at Routes Online breaks this down to overall 8.8% of all Qatar Airways departures being bound for the UAE in 2017, and 1/5 of all their flights being bound to Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt, or the UAE in total. So as you can imagine, waking up on June 5th, 2017 was not a good start to the day for Qatar Airways. This video is not intended to go into politics or discuss the massive implications on the country. Rather, I will solely focus on what happened to Qatar Airways as a consequence of the blockade. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Egypt announced a politically motivated blockade against Qatar, with specific conditions they wanted Qatar to meet for the blockade to end. These conditions were quite unreasonable, so understandably, Qatar was in an impossible situation. Qatar and its airline are like conjoined twins, so whatever happens to the country will directly happen to the airline and vice versa. All of a sudden, 1/5 of Qatar Airways flights could no longer operate, but equally terrible, the airline was no longer able to fly in any of these countries' airspace. That's a challenge when you have almost no airspace of your own, and the neighbors with whom you now have bad blood control the vast majority of it. After June 5th, there were only 3 primary flight paths Qatar Airways could take out of Doha, all of which headed north. The 2 most common were over Iran for flights to Europe and the United States, or over Oman for all other flights. That's right, they now had to fly north to the coast of Iran, then fly all the way along the coast of Oman to reach all their southerly destinations, including all of Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and Oceania. This added more than 2 hours to some flights. On average, these airspace bands added 25 minutes to every single Qatar Airways flight. Think about that, 25 minutes across hundreds of flights per day, every day year in and year out for 3.5 years. If they had 200 flights per day, and they have more than that by the way, that's equivalent to 83 hours of additional flying every day. Imagine how much that costs, not only in fuel, but in staff costs, aircraft wear, and time. This was an economical and environmental disaster. All of a sudden, there were 2 fleet problems for the airline. Their long-haul aircraft and their entire long-haul schedule couldn't operate like before. They needed more flight time on each route, meaning more long-haul aircraft were necessary for fewer flights, causing havoc to their well-established arrival and departure banks for connecting flights. On the other side of the problem, they now had dozens of narrow-body Airbus aircraft that were used on dozens of daily flights to neighboring countries, but were now unusable. They couldn't put these aircraft on long-haul routes, so these aircraft just had to sit around. Thankfully, Qatar Airways got some help from the UK, which was having plenty issues of its own in 2017, giving Qatar Airways some temporary use for its regional fleet, operating flights on behalf of British Airways and Monarch to cover for strikes and a collapse respectively. Sadly, these were only short-term revenue sources and definitely not solutions. Around this time, Qatar Airways was also supposed to receive the A320neo. Unsurprisingly, the blockade along with manufacturing issues at Airbus made the A320neo the last plane Qatar Airways wanted to take on at that time. This order was finally swapped for the A321neo, capable of flying to much of their long-haul network. In June 2020, the airline also cancelled their 737 MAX order, which they had been delaying over and over again. So, from June 5th, 2017 and onward, long-haul became Qatar Airways' only feasible expansion plan. In following years, we saw a remarkable increase in long-haul destinations all across the world, with an increased focus on secondary cities like Malaga or one of my hometowns, Gothenburg, Sweden. In total, they grew to over 160 destinations, almost all medium or long-haul by the end of 2019, with a goal of serving 220 destinations in time for the World Cup in Qatar in November 2022. They did eventually manage to find new missions for their A320 fleet as well, putting them on long and thin routes to Southern and Eastern Europe, India, and Africa, or using them to increase frequencies on routes to Prague and Helsinki, for example. Now, even their A320s had to go long haul, at least as much as possible. So Qatar Airways worked it all out, right? They managed to make the most of this impossible situation and prevail? Well, not really. In the 2016 to 2017 fiscal year, Qatar Airways reportedly made a net profit of $540 million US. Keep in mind that the airline pays virtually nothing in airport fees in Doha, along with a slew of other benefits. Once the blockade started, understandably the airline was going to face losses, which amounted to $69 million US in the 2017 to 2018 fiscal year. Qatar Airways was doing everything they could to put up a fight in courts and in terms of competitiveness, but 2018 to 2019 got even worse, with a loss of $639 million. As you can see, in the 2 years from 2017 to 2019, we're talking about them making $1 billion less. The following fiscal year, ending on March 21st, 2020, the airline reported a shocking loss of $1.9 billion. The Qatar blockade, combined with their subsequent strategy, clearly were not a winning combination. Now, 8 months later, it has officially been announced that the Qatar blockade will come to an end, allowing Qatar Airways to resume flights to neighboring countries and use their airspace. You can only imagine what relief the airline and the entire country must feel. So can we predict what will happen next? The airlines in the region have pretty much been deadly silent, but if we look closely, there are some things they can hide that reveal some interesting clues. Since the start of the pandemic, Qatar Airways has been parking aircraft at Doha's old airport, which is a 15-minute flight from the new airport. Seems quite far, right? Well, not really. There, the airline's A380s, some 777s, A320s, and A330s have been on a lockdown of their own, until a few weeks ago. This is fascinating to me because it shows pretty clearly that Qatar Airways knew that the blockade was ending and have potentially been preparing for months. The first sights appeared on the day before New Year's when an unassuming A320 registered A7LAA repositioned to Doha Hamad Airport. What is significant about this plane? It happens to be a leased A320. Sound familiar? This plane is one of the first 4 A320s delivered to, you guessed it, Al Maha, and it hasn't flown since March. The next few days, 2 A330-300s were also repositioned, with a further 2 flying to Hamad Airport during the making of this video. What does all this indicate for Qatar Airways' plans post-blockade? Stay tuned for part 2. Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare, an online learning community where millions of creative people come together to gain real-world skills. You can choose from thousands of different short classes with a combination of video and class projects. Make 2021 the year where you start working on that meaningful passion project you've always dreamed of. Or make this the year where you improve yourself by learning a bunch of new skills, all for less than $10 a month with an annual Skillshare membership. I was just browsing Skillshare this morning when I came across a class I'd never seen before by one of my favorite speakers, Simon Sinek, called Presentation Essentials: How to Share Ideas That Inspire Action. Storytelling is an invaluable skill for anyone, so being able to learn the top tips from one of the best speakers in the world is just incredible. So start discovering with Skillshare now, and if you're one of the first 1,000 people to click that link at the top of the description, you'll get to try Skillshare Premium for free.